Hi everyone and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be doing a short, sharp, concise video touching patch 12.10. Now, I made it very clear I don't enjoy doing tier lists. I think they're largely hogwash, but I think because the changes are so goddamn significant, I got to do something around this because a lot of people ask me questions. Curtis, should I change my pool? What champs are dead? What's the go essentially? So what I'm going to do one short little tier list, really addressing Platinum 4 and below. And then I'm going to do a higher elo tier list, more like Diamond 4 and above, or even like maybe D2 plus, addressing maybe the higher elo community and maybe how the changes might impact you. And again, this is all tentative. I mean, the patch has been out for what, like a week or something like that. So it's not like these takes are solidified forever. These are always going to get, evolve, change, things like that. Now, so starting with the platform and below, I've got three little tiers here. We've got the first one being champions most definitely negatively impacted. The middle one being, I believe, slightly negatively impacted. And then the bottom one being significantly positively impacted. If your champion isn't here and you're in gold, low plat, don't panic. It just means that your champ's basically similar to what it used to be. Although you might need to adjust some of the feel element towards the game, your damage output, damage input, etc. Now, let's start with the top one, most definitely impacted. Now, what you'll notice is that these are all champions that were already pretty subpar in gold and low plat anyway, maybe outside of Zed. Zed is obviously pretty good, and I'll say maybe Vex can be quite solid as well. I mean, pre-patch 12.10. But now with the durability changes, I think these champions really do struggle, and in hearing from my lower elo clients in my community, these champions have definitely struggled. It's harder to get solo kills, it's harder to get the ball rolling, it's harder to get those early leads, set up those ganks, etc. People are just surviving, and not getting that solo kill makes a very large difference. So because these champs are already kind of pretty average in gold anyway, I think they are definitely severely impacted. And if you are a main of one of these champions and you are in gold and maybe low platinum, it doesn't mean you have to drop them, but I do recommend complementing them with another champion as well. So if you're a Zoe one trick, play Zoe and something else. If you're a Zed one trick, play Zed and something else. Yes, there's ways around it. Yes, they're not unplayable, but I do think they're significantly negatively impacted. Now, we've got the middle tier here, slightly negatively impacted. Now, the reason I said slightly is that, look, these champs are so goddamn solid in gold and low plat anyway, and because people are not playing optimal League of Legends in this elo bracket, they're still going to find a way to get shit done. There's no way Fizz isn't going to kill someone, or Akshan isn't going to get a roam off, or Talon's not going to get a roam off. These things are going to happen no matter what. But again, the durability changes and the tower damage increase is quite significant for these champions, because generally they are looking for dives of some sort, or not just in mid lane, but on a side lane. And I do think their life is made a little bit harder, especially for Fizz as well, because Fizz was already kind of like on the edge. And I think that this has made getting solo kills quite, a little bit more difficult. So you are going to have to dabble around with Leandri's a little bit more with Fizz. And I've actually heard from Akshan players that, sure, the early game is actually somewhat even a positive, a bit of a buff for Akshan, because you're a little bit more durable. You can go in, send it with your E. When people are getting their spikes, they are getting a little bit more tankier, faster in the game. It will actually be hard for you to find those angles to E in. And if you're not Eing in as Akshan and can't find that angle to E in, you're not really that useful. So Akshan is definitely negatively impacted in the lower elo brackets, but yes, you're still going to find angles to get inside the game. Now, we've got the last one here, significantly positively impacted. I believe, yes, there are other champs that have been slightly positively impacted, but the two main ones are Yasuo and Urani. I feel as though the added durability have given these guys, they're hard to deal with in lane. They're harder to burst. I mean, they're already getting things like shield bow anyway. And I think a lot of these champions that were able to somewhat punish the Yasuo and Urani in the early game aren't able to do so anymore, especially if these champs are going, D-shield, secondary resolve, and things like that, even exhaust. So if you're a Yasuo and Urani main, I think this is definitely your meta. You're going to find games being naturally elongated. The early games are going to be a bit slower, which allows you to get to your spikes a little bit faster, or sorry, more reliably. So all systems go if you're a Yasuo and Urani player. Now moving on to the high elo. This is again D4+, maybe even D2+. Now, I want to caveat by saying something here, and this is one of the main reasons I'm so anti-tier list, is that it really depends on the server you're playing in. The tier list for a European Challenger versus NA Challenger versus Korean Challenger and OS Challenger, they're all different. I'd say NA and OS are kind of similar in game base from what I've noticed. I would say Korea and EU maybe a little bit similar, but I would say they're two kind of independent regions as well. So, look, I've tried to do a holistic encapsulation of what I believe the high elo meta is, and I'm going to actually give some explaining here, because I get I get some criticism on my tier list, because again, these are just my take, what I felt in the games, playing them myself, talking to other high elo people in my community and coaching other high elo players, what we've noticed. So we'll start from the top and kind of work way out down, and this is the tier list where I will go a little bit more granular. Now, I've been a massive fan of Ahri for a long time, even at 12.9. I mean, she's been strong for a very, very long time now, 12.8, 12.9. And I still believe she's really strong. Now, my theory with the game right now, given the added durability in the early game, tower's doing a little bit more damage, I feel as though, at least in my games, the way I'm feeling it is, early games are slower, but they're way more explosive. A lot of people interpreted the patch as, oh my god, there's all this durability, everyone's going to play tanks and it's going to be hyper scaling. Everyone's saying, oh, Zia's going to be really strong, Valkors and all this shit. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 second. And even playing it, it doesn't feel that way at all. And I'm guessing it's the same for you guys if you are playing in Diamond Plus. It doesn't feel like everyone's playing tanks and you can just get away with playing a Zia and sitting under your tower. That's just not how I imagine the game playing out. I believe champions that have very consistent power spikes all throughout the game are the best. Champs that spike on one item, and 2, and 3, and 4, and have very consistent power curves or power spikes. Hence why I believe Ahri is such a goddamn solid champion, especially Master Plus, because you have the mobility, you have the adaptability, you have the 2v2 skirmishing, you can minimize basically any lane. It's very, very difficult to shut down. You scale really well as long as you farm well. If any of you have been watching Showmaker get rank 1 and 2 at the moment in the Korean server, watch him play Ahri. He farms incredibly, and he does not fall off whatsoever. Ahri, I believe, is a weak early game champion with a very, very solid mid game and scales beautifully into late game as well, as long as you're farming well. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to win every game with this champ. It is an extremely high skill cap champion where you need to be landing your charms and things like that, but I still firmly believe she is definitively the best mid laner on the patch. Again, I might cop criticism for that. So be it. I think in region, maybe like in NA and OS, it might be a little bit weaker. I think definitively in EU, in Korea, it is still extremely strong. Now I've got LeBlanc. This is a very controversial one. A lot of people hate LeBlanc. They think LeBlanc is bad, and I can see it in OS and NA especially. I can see it not really being that good. I think in Korea and EU, though, in the faster paced regions, from what I've seen with my clients and what I've seen watching a lot of VODs, it's still very, very solid. Arguably, it might even be A-, something like that. Depending on the region, maybe B+, depending on the region you play in. But I still think, again, it has very solid power spikes. It doesn't fall off. It spikes on Everfrost. It spikes on the 2 items, whether you're going like a Zhonya second item or a Shadow Flame or a Void Staff or whatever it is you're going. It's still going to spike on 2 and 3 and 4 items as long as you farm well and you're very competent at the champion. But yes, it still needs to be complemented with high damage compositions. You can't just pick it into a full tank comp. But yes, it has its place and it still is a very solid champion. Now we've got Talia. Now Talia is interesting since the rework. Now I was a little bit dubious about Talia. I mean, a lot of people were hyping up Talia and I didn't really get it. I mean, I think some people were saying she's like this, hyper scaling champion, and I do agree she scales quite well. But I think the biggest strength of Talia in my eyes is that she's very similar to like an Ahri, where she can minimize a lot of tough matchups because of her. I mean, the work ground Q is amazing. The wave clear is really, really good. Her lower cooldowns, cheap mana costs, etc. She can minimize a lot of these rough early game matchups, but then she spikes massively on a mythic or even lost chapter. And once she gets the ball rolling, she can impact fight, she can 2v2 well, especially paired with hard CC champions. Very, very similar to Ahri. I think just Ahri is just a touch more reliable and maybe a little bit safer in the early game. I still believe Talia is quite a little bit vulnerable. But you still need to have a lot of champ mastery with this champion. But I think she's still a solid A, maybe A-, depending on the region that you play in and depending how competent you are on the champion. But again, same thing. Solid power curves, can minimize early game. It's hard to get solo killed. Spikes on 1, 2, 3, 4 items and can 2v2 well. And can obviously roam and adapt to chaos. which inevitably happens in every high elo server. So now we have the A- tier. So starting off with Lucian, I think Lucian did benefit from the new patch again, purely because I think that the game is rewarding these champions that have a somewhat solid early game, or can at least minimize early game, have consistent power spikes, but also have the option to adapt to chaos if it actually ensues in the early game. If you actually think about the trends with a lot of these champions, they have the Ahri, have the Talia, LeBlanc, Lucian. Yes, they can minimize if they're in a tough matchup, and yes, they're happy to play a slow game, but if shit hits the fan, they can also turn it around at level 6 and play a relatively fast game if need be. I think in high elo, it's important your champion can both adapt to chaos and be quite versatile and fast paced if need be. And I think having obviously the mobility is a huge factor of that. But again, Lucian, look at the trend. All these champions spike hard on one item, solid on 2 items, and can scale completely fine into the mid to late game if need be. I think Yona Yasuo benefit, like I said before, with the added durability. They're harder to shut down the early game, and I think it's easier for them to get to their major power spikes now, so especially that shield bow. And on top of that, I think they actually do well into quite a few of these other champions. I think Yasuo specifically as well does quite good into the Talia in there. Can do quite well into the Talia and the Ahri, depending on the jungle he's paired with. I'm unsure whether or not they're A- or B+. It might depend on the server and the competence of the person on those champions. My gut feeling, though, my feeling versed in these sorts of champions, I just feel as though they're in a really good spot. They're harder to shut down, especially if they're going D-Shield, secondary resolve. And again, they're not blind pickable or anything like that, but I think they're paired very nicely with the likes of Karthus Jungle and things like that. So again, I'm going to keep an eye on them, but they're on my radar massively. And then we've got Victor. I think Victor is also quite nice in the patch. Again, the same trend. Spikes fine in the early game. He can go like an early Doran's Darkseal and play a fast-paced game. He can go things like secondary resolve into tougher matchups with shield bash, bone plating. He can minimize against hard matchups. He can take ignite and stat check champs like LeBlanc as well. He can shit on Ahri. He can shit on Talia. He does well into a lot of the meta champs at the moment. But again, he has that trump card of just, okay, I'm happy to take first strike scale and spike into the mid game, mid to late game. He also has that trump card as well. So you're starting to see how all of these champs are somewhat interconnected, but have that overarching similar strength. Now into B+, okay, we'll start to just tackle these one by one. I mean, I think Icarly arguably is B+, or B, again, depending on how slow your server is. I still think she has a place with the added durability. Yes, she has less burst, but I think Icarly isn't necessarily predicated on bursting people. She can always go Conqueror if need be. The early durability helps her survive tougher matchups. She's going to get to a spike. She spikes hard on one item, and again, spikes 2, 3, 4. Same trend here. Akshan's very controversial. I think Akshan, even looking at it right now, I mean, it depends on your server, but if you feel confident in getting things done, if you're looking at the champs in the loading screen, you see, okay, this is a very volatile game, volatile side lanes, volatile bot lane, top bot, sorry, maybe a little bit more aggressive early jungler, you can make Akshan work for sure. I don't think it's something you can pick every single game, but when it's a good Akshan game, it's a great Akshan game. Like, when the stars align, because you got to get that ball rolling. Yes, he drops off maybe a little bit more than he did beforehand, but he can definitely push the pace of the game. He's one of the few champs of the game that can get shit done early. So I think he's just too good for solo queue. Sylas, again, controversial because a lot of people thought that the W nerfs were quite significant, reducing his healing for all ends. But the added durability allow him to stay in combat longer, which can actually allow you to get another W off in a fight, which can mean all the difference. Again, another solid champion that spikes hard on one item. If you go Everfrost and then go second item like Zhonya's or Cosmic Drive, depending on what you want to go. Also, really, really solid. So I'm loving Sylas. I'm a big fan. Sandro Katarina bullshit. I didn't want to talk about it. It makes me angry. Tristana's underrated. I think Tristana actually got a buff at 12 point something. I can't remember off the top of my head. Really underrated. I don't think people really play Tristana mid enough. I think it has a really solid place in the meta, especially playing with AP junglers. It can get early pressure. It can adapt to chaos if need be, especially with that Halo Blades, etc. Take the secondary resolve, bone plating, nasty skirmishing. But also has solid scaling as well, has the scaling factor. Galio, I think we're seeing this a little bit in NA, especially. Look, I think that Galio, Personally, I'm not a fan. I've had people be an advocate for it. I'm personally not a fan because I think it can get dumpstered in lane too much, especially if it is versing some of these champions up here or things like this. But in the right game, it can just kind of scale alongside a lot of these other weaker early game champions and be a nuisance in the mid game. Again, situational pick. Karma, I'm just still a big fan, even though the meta is kind of going away from that early game snowballing. Like, it's not like the early, like, get pressure early, get shit done, then kind of take over the game. It's more like slower early game than spiking on one item. I still think Karma has a place situationally. I think the champ is, again, severely underrated, and I think Felix has really proven that. Although it'll be interesting to see if he continues to play that at 12.10. Again, I'm still kind of unsure about that one. Veigar, hard to shut down. Again, he can minimize a lot of tough matchups. Spikes hard on Everfrost. Same trend over and over again. Good versatility. Can take Predator, adapt to nearby skirmishes. I'm a massive fan of this, especially in solo queue. And for any of you out there versing Veigar, I'm sure it feels very annoying, especially when he's not shut down and then he's roaming around with those Merc treads, with that Predator, running at your team with E, especially when paired with other divers, can be quite annoying. Ahri has been in the dumps for a while. It's been kind of overshadowed by Victor and champs like Syndra, in my opinion. I think it's slowly making a resurgence. Again, the added durability helping out that early game, and with the game length kind of... I'll say the game length is actually still the same, just the pace of the game is slower early game, more snowbally off that one item, which I think benefits Orianna. It'll be interesting to see where she is. Even looking at her right now, I think we should move that maybe a touch to B. I think she's just severely overshadowed by many other these champs. Zoe is arguably A or A minus, depending on the server you play. If you're in Korea, probably A. If you're in EU, maybe A minus. If you're in NA, probably B plus, something like that. I think that if you're good at Zoe, again, you get the ball rolling, spikes hard on one item, can get stuff done, but also if you do farm well, you can spike very nice on two items as well. We're seeing this a lot, especially in Korea. So I would say in the same vein as Akshan, if you do fail and you don't get anything done in the early game, it can be quite disastrous. I say all these three champs, the Karma, the Akshan, the Zoe, is kind of like an alternate way to play into the meta. It's like a niche within the meta itself, depending on what style you want to go. Moving into B. Cassio, poor Cassio. I mean, I think she's struggling for a while. I mean, the meta hasn't really suited her. I mean, playing Cassio into LeBlanc, pain in the ass. Playing into Ahri, not really that easy. I don't like playing it into Victor. It's been a pretty hard counter. There was a lot of Syndra back in the day countering it. Slowly getting there, but I still don't think Cassio adapts that well to Chaos. I think it's a great niche pick, but I think is overshadowed by a lot of these other champs like Zoe and things like that can really take over. I mean, a great Zoe is going to beat a great Cassio any day, in my opinion, especially in high elo games. I do think the slower early game somewhat benefits Cassio, but I still think she lacks that mobility. She lacks the ability to adapt to Chaos and multi-threat comps. Again, good situationally versus low-threat comps, but otherwise will struggle. Vex going down a little bit as well with the... it's harder to kind of burst people. You can't really go that Luden's Electrocute route as much anymore. You're probably going to go more down that Everfrost route, be more facilitative. I think, again, good situationally. But because of the added durability, makes your life a little bit harder. And especially with a lot of these champs being in the meta, like the Yasuos and things like that, it does make your life quite miserable. And it's also a misconception that Vex even does that well into LeBlanc. I think it can in certain situations, but in my opinion, a great LeBlanc is going to be completely fine into a Vex. Syndra, arguably, maybe a little bit worse. I think if you're going the scaling route with Syndra, I think you're okay. Like, you've got to really value your farm, get the ball rolling a little bit early, like get that early pressure down, but you want to be farming 9-10 CS per minute. If you're not doing that, you're not really going to be a champion. TF is controversial. I've had some conversations with people in the MLA about this champ. I hate it. I think it's terrible. But some people have said that the durability have helped compensate for the E changes. That E nerf, in my opinion, killed TF. Like, it is so hard to play TF after those E nerfs when you're versing these lane bullies and you're versing champs that can just set up ganks onto you. Sure, you can rush mercs and do what you want to do, but if you're permanently getting shoved in and you have like this one window to make something happen, it's so hard. You're just getting choked out. You fail one roam and the game's just over. So I'm not a big fan of TF. I think that he has too weak of a lane phase, and I think the E nerfs really hurt him. Although maybe the durability from the patch can bolster up that early game and get him to his level 6, get him to closer to his mythic, where he can actually start doing things. Because if you do have a free lane with TF, you're going to be completely fine. It's just getting to that point is an absolute pain in the ass. Swain, underrated, not played enough. I think a very solid skirmish champion. We kind of skimmed through a few of these ones. Zed, definitely negatively impacted. Potentially even B minus, actually. Depending on the comp you're paired with, but Zed, as always in solo, if paired with an aggressive AP jungler, can always get shit done. But yes, the durability changes did kind of screw over Zed. Kassadin's Kassadin, it's always kind of in there in solo queue, great as a niche counter pick. Can't be blinded. Echo, maybe a little bit too high B, maybe B minus. Again, has that solid power spikes things, doesn't it? I mean, the early durability does arguably help him because he is minimized early, spike hard on Rocket Belt. But is that enough? Is that going to be able to trump a lot of these other champs? Probably not, because a lot of these other champs do so well into Echo. That's the problem. It's not that Echo is bad. It's more that he's just trumped by the other champs that are in the current meta, like the Talia, the Ahri, the LeBlanc, the Yasuo Urani, etc. These champs just, and the Sylas, etc. They just do so much better into the Echo. So poor Echo. I think Echo can come back and make a resurgence soon if the meta switches up a little bit. Okay, again, people have been hyping up the Azirs, the Vel'Kozes, the Zillions and stuff. Sure, maybe in the lower elo brackets you can make that work, but in high elo, these champs just don't have the necessary versatility to chaos. Like, when shit hits the fan, you're versing a multi-threat comp, and fights happening in the river, what are you going to do? Would you rather have an Ahri on your team, or would you rather have a Vel'Koz? Now, it's not to say these champions can't work. If you're very good, like Azap, an amazing Vel'Koz player, can definitely make him work in probably Grandmaster in EU, maybe even Challenger, I'm unsure. But I think that you've got to be an extreme one-trick to make these champions work reliably in high elo. I don't think it's worth your time to put time into these champs. It's not worth your time unless you're a hardcore one-trick. But I still fundamentally believe they're significantly weaker than many other champs in the meta. I mean, I'm all ears. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Prove it to me. Show me all the best players playing these champions. Show me how amazing they are. I haven't seen it. All right. Rather than talking about it, just show me. Zillion, again, I think that the game, because it is a little bit slower in the early game, I think a lot of these champs can kind of take over the Zillion due to the lack of wave clear in the early game, things like that. Again, I'm unsure about Zillion. I'm really confused about him. There's some games he looks really good, some games he looks dog shit. So I'm going to withhold my opinions on Zillion. Rumble, he shouldn't even be B-. I think he's a C. I think he's actually way worse than he was. Vlad, again, true niche, true situation. I don't think he's in the most amazing spot. I think a lot of these champs can really mitigate the burst that he had, especially with the Electric Ignite setup that actually bailed him out of a lot of matchups. That's not as strong anymore. So yeah, I don't think he's really that good. Vlad's Vlad. I don't like talking about that champion. It pisses me off because I think he's just a terrible design champion. But I think that, again, niche situations, yes, but still not that good in high elo. Too slow, takes too long. And you lose a lot of lane control versus a lot of these champions. You can't impact the map. Kind of skimmed through a lot of these. Moving on. And Talon's interesting. I think Talon's kind of underrated. I think he can somewhat do what these champions do to a certain degree. Like, he can minimize early, get to an early one item, get shit done with creative roams. You have to be quite good, though. I think he's just a weaker version of a few of these champs. Anything else that jumps out to me? Tryndamere, poor Tryndamere after the nerfs, feeling really rough. I think he was in a good spot, but just not really feeling it right now because of those nerfs. Plus the added durability of the game does make his life a little bit harder. Aurelia, poor Aurelia. I think Aurelia was in an extremely good position, and I think the way the meta is gone, a lot of these champions fare quite well into the Aurelia. You can bully the Aurelia. And she just doesn't have that get out of jail free card with getting those cheesy solo kills anymore. She's really forced to play for that, one item spike. Now, remember what I said before, where ideally, I believe the meta is favoring a, spike hard on one item, 2 item, 3 item, have constant power spikes throughout the game. I feel like Aurelia spikes well on 1 and well on 2, but I feel like Aurelia doesn't actually spike that well, like 3, 4, 5. Like, it doesn't scale well into late game. It's like a very good mid-game champ, but doesn't scale well into late game. So I feel like you're not getting enough bang for your buck. Like, if you're going to play a champ that's not having the best early game anymore, you might as well pick something that has a solid late game to kind of, compensate for that. I just don't think there's any point. Kiana getting affected for the same reason Zed has. Why is he in C and not B-? I mean, I just think that Kiana has a weaker laning phase. Zed has the ability to minimize a little bit earlier, in my opinion. Easier. Has an easier time minimizing. But that could be just server differences. I could be wrong about that one. Fizz, struggling for the same reasons, especially in GM+. I think Fizz is extremely good, like D4 to Master Tier. I think Fizz only really struggles GM+ when the laners start to get really competent, because I think Fizz has that item flexibility. He can go the Ludens, he can go the Leandries. I think having item flexibility does help you as a champion, which is actually why I kind of like Swain as well. He has that item flexibility. Katarina has the item flexibility. So does the Victor, the LeBlanc. A lot of these champs have that item flexibility that I think is so goddamn important in high elo games. And then Paul Rise at the bottom. I don't even want to talk about him. Makes me sad. They need to do something about this champion immediately. So, overall, you'll notice that I haven't actually put an S tier. I didn't put anything in S tier. I don't think anything is overpowered. I think the game is relatively balanced. As you can see, it's actually not too different to what the meta was in 12.9, to be honest with you, in my opinion. So again, this is all tentative. It's only been like a week since the last patch. This is the way I'm thinking about the game. Hopefully you guys can see where I'm coming from. I'll try and answer questions in the comments if you have anything. Only final comments about the patch, I would say that the tower damage increase is significant. So please be careful on those dives. Other than that, guys, love to hear your thoughts. This is the way I'm thinking. I'll probably talk about more of this on the podcast, my podcast, the BBC podcast. Otherwise, cheers and good luck in your solo queue.